Okay, welcome everyone to whatever number class this is, sixth, I don't know, seventh, somewhere in there, sixth.
Six, I believe.
Okay, good. So let's go ahead and start with the prayers. Mary will put those on the screen and Jana will kindly lead us in those prayers. Maybe I can put the camera on Jana.
There's things on top of, there we go. We'll do the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times in English. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Short mandala offering, once in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with mountains, for continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offering. May all living beings enjoy this pure. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamiriasayami. Refuge in Bodhicitta, we'll do once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodam Soki Choknama Jamchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsuchi Daki Chunyan Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penchir Sangye Drupa Sho Sangye Chodam Soki Choknama Jamchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsuchi Daki Chunyan Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penchir Sangye Drupar Sho. Good. Thank you, Jana. Thank you, Mary, for your help with that. Let's go ahead and do a short meditation before we begin. Give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit, let go of whatever distractions we might have from our day. And then we'll set our motivation together. So just spend the first few minutes in silent meditation on the breath, using the breath in whatever way suits your mind. And then I'll come in and again lead you in refreshing our motivation for our time together.
So now let's set our motivation for this evening's class. And I was thinking, since we lost our dear Sister Max last week, many of you know that she passed away. She was one of the original founders of the FPMT. The two lamas, Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe, as well as Zena and Mummy Max, as she was fondly called, were the founders of this organization that we're a part of. It just made me think about all the causes and conditions that have led to us being able to be here in this center within the FPMT, studying the teachings of these great masters of India and Tibet, due to the kindness of so many people that came before us. And it is important that we acknowledge this, because without all of these causes and conditions, without our having met with the Dharma, we would be lost. We would continue to be wandering in this world, trying to find meaning and purpose. But through the kindness of these beings, we have found this most precious Dharma, and especially the Mahayana Dharma, and more especially the Vajrayana, the quick path. So just take a moment first to just rejoice in your amazing good fortune to have benefited from the kindness of all these beings that came before us, who helped create this organization, who kept it going. And as Mummy Max was one of the chief people who did so much fundraising, allowed the FPMT to not just survive, but to thrive. Just take a moment to feel joyful at all of what has led to you being involved with this organization and the Dharma in this very moment. And then as we set our motivation, we can recognize that this is how we actually create the causes for others to meet the Dharma and for this organization to continue, is through generating the best motivation for being here. If we are all individually dedicated to achieving enlightenment to benefit all beings, then we create that energy that helps the Dharma to remain in this world and to prosper in this world and to become a source of well-being and happiness for countless other beings. So setting our motivation isn't just isolated to this moment. It becomes a part of what we are aiming to do, to bring the Dharma to sentient beings, because we have confidence that this is the way to help them. This is the way to bring them to happiness and to free them from suffering. Kind of renew your own sense of the role that you play individually in setting motivation tonight with the health of the Dharma in this world. I think that we're creating this motivation with that aim, so the Dharma can remain very long, that all of our teachers can remain very long, so that not just ourselves, but all beings will benefit from the presence of the Dharma in this world. And think that this is why we're here tonight, to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, and recognizing that to do that, we do need to keep this light of the Dharma shining in this world. When you're ready, you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin. So again, we had added Mummy Max to the prayer list last week because she was declining, and unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to go by and see her. I thought about going to see her on Friday, which is when she passed away. Yes.
She lived in Santa Fe?
She lived in Santa Fe, yes. She lived in Santa Fe for quite a few years. I don't recall when she moved there, but it was well over a decade ago.
And was
So
she Charlene? mother?
No, 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 no. No, she's old student, one of the first students of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, Western students, yeah. Um, can't hear very well? Huh, I don't know. Um, yeah, maybe turn it up a little bit in the Golpa here. So, Mummy Max, yeah, Sister Max. She passed away, yeah, last Friday. So again, I'm a bad FPMT student. I haven't read Big Love, the wonderful biography of Lama Yeshe and the organization. I started it, but I didn't even get to the point where Lama Yeshe was teaching Westerners. So anyway, I'm don't know the whole history, but Mummy Max was one of those rare people who just immediately from the beginning knew what she needed to do and started helping the lamas to develop the FPMT. And so we are indebted to her as well as to so many other people who came before us. So anyway, I just thought I would mention her tonight because she's been kind of on my mind. Just know that every Friday at noon, they're scheduling a Medicine Buddha Puja. Geshe Tenzin Zopa, who is down at TNL now, was there to do prayers at her bedside after she took her last breath. And he recommended that every Friday at around noon, we do Medicine Buddha Puja. And I'll be leading at least one, maybe two of those, I'm not sure, but that'll be later in March. Yeah.
So she's not anymore in repose.
No, her consciousness has left the body, several days ago, I think. Monday, maybe. I think it was Monday. Okay, let's get on with our text. We are working again with this wonderful text by Nagarjuna, Letter to a Friend. And I wanted to go ahead and get the text on the screen, but I'm going to actually need to get it to the right page. So sorry, I didn't get this set up ahead of time. I was running a little bit later getting in here. But what page do I need to be at? Page 20. So let me put that in here. Okay, so we started chapter 2 of the way that it's structured in this commentary. Again, we're using a commentary that is by Venerable Rendawa, who was Lama Tsongkhapa's guru. And we're in the section, just let's scroll down, instruction directed primarily to householders. Remember, this is one of the real kind of important things about this text, is that it's primarily geared to lay people like ourselves. And in the audience that I see in front of me now, there are no ordained people. But the idea is that we do see advice that pertains to both. And even what we have in here isn't exclusively for householders. But because we live lives that are involved with people, much more so than the ordained perhaps do, they live in a rather secluded community of mostly monastics. It is important that we understand the ways to make good use of what we experience in terms of this first verse we looked at last week, respecting one's father and mother, recognizing that there's great benefit to this because of the role that our parents play in regard to our welfare. They are very powerful objects for us. So now we're going to look at this second section that's got a funny little Sanskrit word in here, observing upavasa. Upavasa is, going to see a translation of it, or some reference to it coming up, but it essentially means fasting. Let me take it off screen for a moment. Many of you are familiar with the sort of 24-hour 8 Mahayana precepts that you take. And one of the main vows within that is the vow to fast, essentially. You eat a single meal. If you're only taking them for a day, generally you only eat a single meal about midday, finish by midday, and then you don't eat again, no solid food until breakfast the next morning after the sun has come up. So you take those 24-hour vows and you kind of abide in a fast for that. But then there's also, of course, those vows are incorporated into the ceremony that you know of as the Nyongne. Nyongne is technically means abiding in the fast, where you actually have that for the first 24 hours, and then you refrain from all food and liquid for the second day, the second set of 24 hours, and then you break the fast on the third morning. And it's a very powerful ceremony that you can engage in with prostrations and the ritual around Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion. But know that we've seen these vows before, most of us, in this Mahayana tradition, but we generally see them presented as the 8 Mahayana precepts. Here they're being presented in what are called the pratimoksha vows, which again, most of us, when we hear pratimoksha, because we're lay practitioners, we think the 5 lay vows that we are familiar with of not killing, not stealing, not committing adultery, not lying, and then not taking alcohol. And of course, those are taken for life. And it is an important practice for lay practitioners to try to take at least some of those, if not all of them. But within the pratimoksha are also the vows of ordination for the monks and nuns to take the initial vows, the novice vows, the full ordination, and so on. But included in those pratimoksha vows is what are called the upavasa vows, which are essentially 24-hour 8 vows that are similar to what we take, but they're not done with Mahayana motivation, because again, the pratimoksha isn't unique to Mahayana. The pratimoksha is taught for all Buddhist practitioners. And so it's the individual liberation. It's the vows that support our becoming liberated. So these 8 are being presented here in the context of a practice that is done by those who are of any Buddhist persuasion, not necessarily, again, with a Mahayana motivation. But we're going to see them presented, again, very similar to what we practice when we take those. And speaking of those, I might encourage you to think about taking them this Saturday, which is the final day of this first 2 weeks of the new year. It's usually referred to as the Day of Miracles, but technically all 14 of these days from Losar, which was on the 5th until 5th? No, it was later than that, wasn't it? 7th, I can't remember what day it was, all the way to the 24th, which is, it was the 10th. I think it's the 10th. I'm sorry, I don't know why I said the 5th. February 10th was Losar, because I was teaching at TNL that day when they had Losar, and it goes until this Saturday, February 24th. And that's technically usually called the Day of Miracles because it's the full moon, the first full moon of the new year. And it's good to do the practice of taking the 8 Mahayana precepts if you can, if you feel inclined to, on powerful days like that, when we accumulate 100,000 million or something amounts of merit. I don't remember what the exact number is that Rinpoche cited, but it's huge, the amount of merit that you gain on those days. And you're not doing it for yourself, you're doing it for all beings so that they can benefit from your taking those vows. So let's take a look at the commentary on this, and it'll just refresh our memory on what is involved in these vows to some extent. Though there's really not as much commentary on the vows as what you would get sometimes from Mahayana sources. It says there, since it is difficult for those who dwell as householders to follow a religious way of life at all times, the following 2 verses, again from Nagarjuna's text, present the rite of posada. It's called posada there, and I'll explain what that means in a moment, which consists of 8 precepts so that persons might do so, if only for the period of 1 full day. So again, you're observing fasting as part of this rite of posada. Posada technically it's also referred to in Tibetan as sojong. And many of you have heard of sojong because the monastics on the new moon and the full moon each month go into a confession ritual that they do with community. And that's a more formal way of doing this sort of practice. But I think why this is called a rite of posada is because it also you're encouraged to do on those 2 days of the month, the new moon and the full moon. The new moon is the last day of each lunar month. The full moon is usually around the 15th day of each lunar month. So again, it seems to refer to those days when laypersons will be encouraged to take the 8 precepts. But you can take the 8 precepts anytime. It's not like you only take them at those times of the month. And again, you do that for the period of 1 full day, from when you take the vow in the morning, which is usually done just before dawn, until sunrise the next day. So it says there in the verse, when one eschews, by the way, I looked up this word eschew, I wanted to make sure I was pronouncing it correctly, but it's actually got 2 pronunciations. It can be pronounced eschew, and that just sounded too weird to me. So when one eschews harm, thievery, sexual intercourse, falsehood, liquor, the desire for untimely food, delight in a high seat, song, dance, various forms of jewelry, and takes on these 8 precepts in emulation of the Arhat's moral practice, that is posada, which bestows on both men and women the appealing body of a desire realm deity. it produces that type of merit for a beautiful fruition in terms of the God realms. Not that we would do it with that motivation. We do it again in the Mahayana tradition with the Mahayana motivation. But apparently it is said that if you have the the 5 lay vows, then many of the other practitioners don't necessarily do these 8 precepts. Seems like in the Mahayana, they adopted doing them as a way of augmenting, supplementing our practice of the pratimoksha vows. So it's not technically a pratimoksha vow thing that we're doing when we take them in the Mahayana with the Mahayana ritual. It's a unique thing that is, again, within our tradition or the Mahayana tradition. So the observance of 8 precepts, Venerable Randawa says, emulating the moral practice of former arhats for the period of 1 full day, is called posada. These 8 precepts are the shul of 1, harm, which means taking the lives of others. So on that day, you take a vow not to kill for those 24 hours. Secondly, thievery, which is the act of taking what is not given, stealing. Third, sexual intercourse. Now, again, when you take the vow to avoid sexual misconduct, then you are taking a vow not to engage in adultery or any, behaviors that are severe in terms of sexual behavior that would be harmful to others. Here, for the 24 hours, you take a vow not to have any sexual contact at all. 4, stating falsehoods, lying. Number 5, alcoholic spirits and all intoxicants, which are the source of heedlessness. And then 6, untimely food. And untimely food is where we get the title of the upavasa, that it's a fasting ritual. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Number 7 is a high seat, one which is more than a cubit in height, which of course is hard for us to, because cubit is not that tall. Or actually, yeah, I don't think it's that tall. I think if we measured most of our beds, yeah, it's about from the, Eloise is pointing out, from like your fingers to your elbow, if you're extending your hand. So it's not most of our beds are probably taller than that. So I'll talk about that too in a moment. But so then number 8, singing, dancing, all unguents. Unguents is usually perfumes that is talked about here, not medical unguents, but except those used for treating disease. I don't know. I mean, unguent is not a word I hear that often, but it seems like it's mostly referring to perfumes and any form of jewelry. The fruit of observing these is that in a future life, one is provided with the appealing body of one of the 6 classes of desire realm deities. Okay, so that's kind of the basic commentary on that verse, but we'll go into more detail. Let me talk about the last few, because I think the first ones are clear because we've talked about those in regard to the 10 non-virtues. Except again, sexual behavior here is different because it includes any sexual behavior for those 24 hours. But what we're talking about in terms of the 6th one that pertains to eating food, you only have the 1 midday meal. If you are taking, at least in our tradition, we do allow that if you are taking these for a longer period of time, such as if you're on retreat and you're doing them every day, then you can have 2 meals. You can have breakfast when you get up and you can have your midday meal, and then you don't eat food again until breakfast the next day. This is how we even do it, and we did it in retreat with Rinpoche when we would do a long retreat, is that you would be allowed to have 2 meals rather than just the single meal. And it is a bit hard to just do that repeatedly day after day of only just the 1 meal, because you get pretty hungry, not eating for most of the day. After you finish your meal, then you're only allowed to have generally clear liquids, or if they have a pulp or something to them, it can't be more than like 1/3 of the substance in the fluid. But essentially, it's best to stay away from anything except clear liquids for the remainder of that day into the morning. And then once you get past sunset, when the vow is complete, then you can eat food again. Again, if you're taking it repeatedly, though, you would just have a single meal for breakfast, then a single meal for lunch. I might also mention that in at least the Mahayana precepts, I think it would be the same for the when it's part of the pratimoksha, that you are not to eat what are called the black foods. Black foods here is just referring to foods that have a disturbance to our system because of the nature of them. They include meat, eggs, garlic, onion, And then it says radishes, but I think it's a particular radish from what Rinpoche would always say. Can't think, it starts with is it daikon? He says it's because it produces a lot of gas in your system. Some of these things again are because you want to be able to use the day well, meditating and what have you. And it seems that a lot of these can be problematic for the winds in your body and the serviceability of your body. So those are the things that you need to avoid when you're doing the precepts as well. So don't have eggs for breakfast and make, pasta with garlic and onion and everything for lunch. Try to have of course you eat vegetarian because you're not eating meat, but you would want to avoid any of those additional substances. When it comes to the seventh one, which is like singing, dancing, sometimes they say playing music even, it wasn't in the list here, and then perfumes and jewelry. I mean, my own take on it, and I know that other people might say so, I also avoid any entertainment that day, because of course at the time of the Buddha, it didn't have, Netflix and TV and whatever. So, you can watch things that are Dharma that you would like to receive the Dharma that day is you can use that as like your downtime is to actually receive Dharma instruction. But don't go, you know, surfing on the net and doing all these things and watching this, watching that. Because that's just really, again, it's the same spirit of what we're talking about here. Now, there may be some people who take it quite literally and say, well, as long as you're not singing and as long as you're not listening to music, so you don't want to go to like YouTube and listen to song after song, because that would be music potentially. But I think all entertainment kind of falls into that. And I think it keeps, and even like reading books, I read Dharma. Don't read novels that are going to kind of take you away and get you out of that state. You want to spend the day as virtuously as possible. You take the precepts to supplement your practice of virtue, not to make that your practice of virtue and then do something else with your day. So again, that's the idea behind these. The I skipped the seventh one actually. That was the eighth one. The seventh one was the high seat. If you're sleeping in your ordinary bed, I've always heard the instruction that's perfectly fine then. This is mostly about reducing pride, not wanting a higher seat or something that is elevated so that we get feelings of grandeur that come along with that. So if it's your normal bed that you sleep in, then that's perfectly fine. Some teachers I have heard say you're supposed to sleep on the floor those days and not sleep on your bed, but I never have taken it that way, and none of my main teachers that I took these from have ever, presented it that way. So the idea is, again, we're working with these things that are activities that we avoid in the context of reducing our delusions. Why? Because we get attached when we listen to music and play, sing and dance and whatever. And we generally get attached when we're wearing jewelry and perfume and eating a lot and whatever. We're trying to reduce our attachment for those 24 hours and just live a very simple life. So again, that's the purpose behind this. Let's look at the remainder of the commentary that's in this section so we can finish this topic. It says here, one may ask, well, let me push it down just a little bit, for whom this will occur. It will come about for any man or woman of the three continents who has maintained the above mentioned practice. The three continents, I don't remember which one they exclude, but there are said to be four main continents in our world system. And one of them, there's some exclusions based on some factors there, but it's not so important. Let's just think about what we know here. It's any man or woman of this world. It will not occur for others because they are unable to acquire the pratimokshavas. It's actually said that people who are undefined in their gender, there's all these obstacles that are traditionally set about in regard to that, like hermaphrodites, or if there's someone born without a gender. I don't know if that happens at all, but I suppose it's possible. But the idea is that that leads to an unsettling of the mind that makes it a very difficult basis for taking vows. So that's the reason. And again, I don't want to go too far down that whole alleyway of discussing gender issues and what have you. We live in a very different age again than what the Buddha taught these in. But so the upavasa, the fasting vow, is subsumed then, these 8, within 5 limbs, undertaking the eschewal of harm towards other, which includes killing. And then number 2, the second, undertaking the eschewal of harm towards oneself and others, which actually includes the sexual intercourse, because again, sexual harm can happen to both ourselves and others. And I'm sorry, the first one also included not stealing, because that also is harm towards others. So we have killing and stealing in the first limb, sexual intercourse in the second limb. Number 3, preserving one's precepts from corruption, which includes the lying and alcohol, I believe. No, I'm sorry, that's actually the lying. The 4th consists of the refraining from alcohol. That's remaining mindful and aware so as to eschew harming others' lives and property and to prevent one's precepts from becoming corrupted. That's the main reason why we refrain from alcohol and intoxicants, is because it's a doorway through which we can engage in negativity. We talked about that previously. Number 5, preventing the memory from becoming clouded. And of course, that's due to the remaining ones. Oh, I'm sorry, I got it mixed up here. We're going to get to the explanation in a moment. The third, let's go to the explanation, because it does get a little weird in terms of how these are included. Number 5 tends to be the alcohol one, sorry, preventing the memory from becoming clouded. And it seems like the 4th one, I think, is what includes these other activities, because once you engage in those other activities, you do tend to maybe lose some of your mindful awareness. The first of these limbs, undertaking the eschewal of harm towards others, consists of eschewing harm to the life and property of others. So it's the killing and stealing. Number 2, the second is comprised of eschewing sexual intercourse. For by abstaining from sexual relations with one's own spouse, a person avoids harm to themselves, and by abstaining from sexual relations with the spouse of another, they avoid harm to others. The third limb consists of eschewing the statement of falsehoods. And again, that one was preserving one's precepts from corruption by not lying. All right, so the 4th consists of the remaining 3 precepts, with the exception of eschewing intoxicants. For when individuals who constantly indulge in dance, song, music, ointments, jewelry, high seats, and untimely food temporarily refrain from, oh, this isn't the version, from such practices, they will at all times remain in a state of attentive recollection, reflecting that they are nurturing themselves by the observance of posada. I hope I have the right version here. That I think it is, but for some reason mine looks different than this one. Not sure if I replaced it with the right one, but I think everything still should be intact. So again, this idea behind this 4th one is that we lose our mindfulness when we engage in all these various activities. We won't be able to maintain our proper observance of the vow. The 5th limb is the eschewal of intoxicants, for the recklessness and confusion brought about by alcoholic spirits will induce one to violate the precepts unwittingly, despite any intention to remain mindful and aware. Now, again, I did notice that in that previous page, when it talked about that one pertaining to alcohol, it also mentioned other intoxicants. And I just might briefly mention that it's best, especially if you're just doing the 24-hour vows, to refrain from anything that's going to cloud your mind, just to make it very pure. If you decide to take the vow that pertains, the pratimoksha vows that pertains to alcohol and intoxicants, it's always best to ask your preceptor before you take it as to what that includes. Some preceptors might give it only as alcohol, and then you'd be free, if you so desire, to use other substances that you would cloud the mind. But again, ideally, as Buddhist practitioners, we should want to keep our minds as clear as possible. But again, that's something within the 24-hour vows. I would really encourage you just to say, okay, 24 hours, I'm not going to do anything like that. I also have heard the question whether that includes cigarettes. Nicotine does have some effect on the mind, but I've never heard anyone say absolutely. Most people don't smoke these days anyway. It's not a very common behavior, but it is good to, again, check with preceptors if you're going to take the lifetime vows, so that you're very clear as to what you're taking. Let's go back to the text, but I don't want to spend much time on these at all. These are like questions that come up because there are some things that are included in the monastic vows that you would think should be included here, or that are stated differently. And it's not so important, because again, we're not as interested in the monastic vows as we are, and these 8 that can be taken as part of a way of practicing virtue for 24 hours. You may ask why the eschewal of accepting gold and silver, though included among the precepts of the Shramanera, is not made part of the Upavasava precepts. Again, that means it's in the monastic vows, but it's not here in the 8 that are for 24 hours. The reason is that a Shramanera takes up the state of a homeless ascetic for whom 2 activities are extremely improper and unbefitting. First, overindulgence in sensory pleasures, such as delighting in games and behaving wantonly, and 2, hoarding wealth. In this regard, the renunciations ranging from the eschewing of dance, song, music, and so forth, up to the eschewing of untimely food, are accepted in order to avoid the first impropriety, which again is overindulging in sensory pleasures. Renouncing the practice of accepting gold and silver is accepted in order to avoid the second impropriety of hoarding wealth, insofar as gold and silver are both the root and substance of hoarding. This latter, however, is neither a grave offense nor an impropriety for householders, so that renouncing the acceptance of gold and silver is not included among the Upavasa precepts. Right? There's no problem with us hoarding as much money as we want. Which is essentially, usually, I mean, when you deal with fully ordained monastics, it's always best to give them money or anything in envelopes, or even if they've got an attendant or someone who can care for the money for them, to give that to them that way, as opposed to giving it to them directly. They can accept the money, but they have to be very careful about how they handle money. And some of them can't even, I mean, it's a full ordination vow, I believe, you can't even handle it. Like, things have to be managed, kind of for you in a sense. It's something that, again, gets you away from the idea of having wealth, carrying wealth, what have you. So that's the idea behind that. It's, again, not so important, but just kind of pointing out, well, why isn't that included? Because it's not really something that's a problem for householders, especially for those 24 hours. So one may ask, it says then, why indulging in dance, song, music, perfumes, jewelry, and ointments forms the basis of a single precept of the Upavasa vows, whereas in the case of a Shramanera, they are made into 2 precepts. I mean, I wouldn't have asked it, but I guess Venerable Randava, somebody did ask it. He says, this is so that if a householder should indulge in all of them, they would need to make absolution for but a single offense rather than 2. Thus, they are included within a single precept in order to be more lenient. These activities, however, are most unbefitting for those who have left the home life, for monastics. For greater strictness, they are made into 2 precepts for them, so that 2 offenses, not just 1, would have to be absolved in the event of their violation. So again, there are times when for monastics, it's set out with the aim of helping to avoid these behaviors through spelling things out as separate vows. And then you would have breaking of the vows and what have you on the basis of that specific behavior. But for lay practitioners, it seems that they just moved them into 1, so that if you were to do any of these things, sing, dance, whatever, it's kind of interesting. I do find that when I take precepts, that often like some weird song from the 60s pops into my head, and all of a sudden I start singing it. That's why we shouldn't sing and do all that stuff regularly when we're not taking the precepts. Then we won't have the problem. But the idea is that when we do have that, we only break the 1 vow that pertains to any of these behaviors. Again, I don't want to go into too much of a detailed description on the 8 Mahayana precepts. There's a wonderful commentary that you can find at Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives, lamayeshe.com, and it goes into the specifics about it and gives more detailed explanation. But it is an important practice within the Mahayana to do those 8 vows, because again, even if you have already the 5 lay vows, well, then you have some of what's included in those 8. But the additional vows that you take, and the fact that you're taking all 8 with Mahayana motivation, makes them very powerful. So I encourage you to engage in those if you can. It's ideal to receive them from a qualified master initially, but even if you haven't, you can still take them. They aren't as powerful. But of course, you can take them even from a video of that master giving them, which in the FPMT, Lama Zopa did give them once, and they put it on video, and you can go to fpmt.org, and you can find the video and take the precepts from Lama Zopa. That is a way of receiving that vow from Lama Zopa in regard to these 8 Mahayana precepts. Let's go on to topic 3. Again, there are 9 topics in this section. This one's called Eschewing Wrong Attitudes. Through their attachment to base activities, householders give rise to a large number of wrong attitudes, such as greed and so forth. Since these attitudes cause one to take birth in the lower states of existence, the following verse is stated so that they might be rejected. So again, this is spelling out, I think there's 13 in total, because one of them gets divided into 5. But the idea is that some of these are labeled differently in different texts. We're dealing with, again, Artemis Engels and Geshe Tarchin's translation of this text, I believe, is what we're the 2 that were involved in this. So they used different translation equivalents sometimes for these. View as enemies greed, cunning, and deceit. Let me go down. Attachment, idleness, haughtiness, lust, and hatred. Those are 8 right there. Then conceit, from greatness of 1, family, 2, physical appearance, 3, learning, 4, health, and 5, authority, bringing us to a total of 13 that are mentioned here. Okay, so let's go through the explanation of these, and I'll point out where there might be some different translations of these. First one is greed or stinginess, right? Holding on tightly to what we have. Miserliness is a strong clinging to one's possessions, and this opposes generosity. This is like, how many times have we heard the word generosity or liberality in this text? A lot, right? It's a very important practice that we try to have the attitude of being free with our resources, with what we possess, with our time, our willingness to help others. Number 2, cunning. Cunning is sometimes called dissimulation. It's the adherence to methods of concealing one's faults. Dissimulation is where you kind of pretend that you don't have the faults that you actually possess. So you're not as free to reveal them to others. Whereas deceit is a displaying of false attributes that you don't have for the purpose of deceiving others, right? So dissimulation and deceit are often talked about in the text on the mental factors because they kind of go hand in hand. One is to hide what faults you do have, and the other one is to reveal qualities that you don't have, to show off qualities that you don't possess. These are both done with an aim of having the other person think better of you because they're not seeing your faults and they think you have greater qualities than what you have. And this again is faults for all practitioners, not just lay practitioners. As is attachment. Attachment is desire for the body and material wealth. So desire or attachment we know of as one of the root poisons and something that as a householder we do have to watch our minds because it's very easy with all of the goods and things that we have for attachment to arise quite easily, as well as, of course, for the body of others when we are in relationship with others, which monastics don't have that element of attachment, at least in terms of the proximity, though they can still obviously develop a mind of attachment for others' bodies. But again, for householders, it's a particular problem. The next one, idleness, this is our 5th one, or laziness, is the aversion to virtuous endeavors. Again, there are the 3 types of laziness that are usually taught, but they can kind of manifest in a variety of ways. The first one is our indolence, our not doing something at all, kind of putting it off. The second one is our attachment to worldly affairs. And the third one is when we have kind of the laziness of self-defeatism, when we think that we can't do something and therefore we're not even going to try. Then the 7th, I think we know, 6th is haughtiness. Haughtiness and pride are sometimes interchanged. I think Geshe Zopa in his commentary called this conceited pride. Even conceit is sometimes thrown out. We're going to see it coming up. It was in the verse. But the idea behind this is, as it explains there, it's the inflated feeling that develops from believing one possesses extraordinary qualities, which in turn one does not. So it seems to be primarily focused on building up our own sense of self, kind of this puffed up state of mind that is believing that we have something we don't. It's a pride of a sense of deceit, really, to some degree, goes along with this, but it's all revolving around the pride in ourselves. And then we have lust. Lust is the desire for sexual intercourse, which Geshe Sopa points out is set out separately here for householders because of the temptation of sexual intercourse. We already talked about the attachment to bodies, but nonetheless, it's set out here quite specifically to address the fact that this is a problem, again, that we can get distracted by in our daily life. And then finally, hatred, the eighth, is a feeling of malice towards another being, which again is part of that root affliction of anger and so on. So these, again, I think are pretty straightforward. These 8 attitudes and conceit, which is divided into 5, the inflated feeling caused by attachment to the 5 objects that are mentioned, which again were family of high social standing, having beautiful physical appearance, having high learning, education, having good health and kind of a body that is appealing and attractive, and then power or authority is the last one. So depending upon our own individual situation, we might have this sense of conceit by being attached to our status in regard to any of these 5. So that comes out to 13 non-virtuous dharmas, which steal the life spirit of virtue. One should thus regard them as enemies, not giving way to them even for an instant. So again, Geshe Sopa in his commentary didn't necessarily really address like, well, why are these particular ones chosen out of the whole list? If you've studied minds and mental factors, you know that there are the 6 root delusions, and then there are the 20 secondary delusions. So this is not really 13 because conceit would be counted as 1 in that list. So this is really like 9 out of those 26. So why aren't the other ones included? I don't really know, but obviously for some of these, again, we see their importance for lay practitioners, for householders, because we're out and about in the world. We're seeing more people, we have more opportunities for attachment and so on to arise, right? As well as our greed, that can, because we are all about kind of maintaining our own little space and everything, sometimes we become very tight around what we own. Whereas monastics don't own anything generally other than the few robes that they have and whatever dharma materials and things. They don't acquire and seek to gain more material possessions and what have you. So we see that there's some logic to why these are set out, but again, I can't speak to why doesn't it include jealousy, for example, which you would think would be pretty common in householder life as well, where we have people who are have more than we do or possess things that we would like and what have you. There's just a little closing to this in regard to pride. Pride is defined as the inflated attitude which comes about through comparing the status of one's family or whatever one has with that of others. So there's a comparison going on, whereas conceit is defined as the inflated attitude which develops from considering the status irrespective of what others have. So we can feel a sense of conceit, not even comparing ourselves to others, just feeling, wow, I've really got it. I've got this great social status, or I've got this beautiful body or whatever. And it might not be comparing, to anyone else. Whereas pride is something that arises when we think, I'm so much smarter than that person, or I'm so much prettier than that person, or whatever the case might be. All right. Again, this is different words are used for these in different texts, so it's very hard to kind of compare these to some of them in the mental factors list. But nonetheless, we'll just go with the explanation that's here and understand the difference between those 2 mind states. It is set out in the Abhidharma Kosha, but what is interesting is I think when I went to a translation of that, it gave haughtiness for one, and I think it was pride for the other, but I don't think it was lined up the way it is here at all. Pride is inflatedness, whereas conceit is a suspension of mental activity brought about through attachment to one's own attributes. So again, we can see the purpose in highlighting some of those things that we do need to watch in our daily activities and our way of being with others. And in spite of the fact that, we might not have a lot of time for meditation to develop mindfulness, it is set out as a separate practice that we're encouraged as householders to engage in. Now, another translation, actually in the book by Geshe Sopa, it's translated there as conscientiousness. These two have kind of a very different meaning when it comes to the mental factors. Mindfulness as a mental factor is usually a sense of not forgetting, which needs to be present if we are going to be conscientious. But conscientiousness is a specific virtuous mental factor, whereas mindfulness is not necessarily virtuous, right? Because you can be very mindful of how you are going to steal something from somebody so that they don't detect that it was you that did it, right? I mean, we can use mindfulness in a non-virtuous application. So mindfulness is a necessary skill, if you will, to have to maintain our conscientiousness. But conscientiousness is the virtuous mental factor that refers to our general guarding from non-virtue. It's kind of a general way of being that we are conscientious, aware of what is going on, so that we close the door to those states of mind and actions that are non-virtuous, and we engage in virtue instead. It's benefited by two that I think are going to come up later in the text. I'm pretty sure they do. They're often called shame and embarrassment, but I like to think of them as self-respect and consideration for others. These aid in our developing conscientiousness, because if we have self-respect, then we think, I shouldn't be behaving this way. This is not good for me to lie to somebody or to take something that isn't offered and what have you. And therefore it supports my conscientiousness, but it's a real specific application where I think about that thought. This isn't good for me to be engaging in this. Whereas consideration for others is thinking that, and this also can have a bearing on others and make them look bad, such as my teachers or other Buddhist practitioners or whatever, where we have that consideration for how our actions may have a negative kind of peripheral effect on other beings. So we don't want to engage in negativity out of those two mindsets, but conscientiousness is the general kind of container for our behavior to keep us on the straight and narrow, to keep us doing what we need to do. It's kind of close to the word we use as conscience, right? Conscientiousness, conscience, Jiminy Cricket, right? Always let your conscience be your guide. It's kind of like that, keeping you on the straight and narrow, keeping you in the realm of what you want to practice. And at times we need to think, I really shouldn't do this because this isn't good for me. We also think, man, I shouldn't do this because it's not good for others for me to behave this way. But anyway, this is what we're talking about here, is the sense of conscientiousness, not just a pure mindfulness that doesn't have a virtuous component necessarily. It can, again, but so mindfulness is the root of all virtuous things, or conscientiousness. Since even householders are able to be mindful or conscientious, the following verse is stated with the aim of establishing them in that attitude. The Muni declared, I'm going to use conscientiousness because I just think it fits better. The Muni declared conscientiousness the way of immortality and heedlessness the way of death. Thus, constantly practice conscientiousness with respect in order to develop virtuous dharmas. Again, have that awareness of what we're doing and trying to stay on the path of virtue and not let non-virtue creep in. If we're heedless, I have no problems with that word. Heedless means that we lack that conscientiousness. We're just careless. We just are not maintaining it. Okay, so conscientiousness is the state of intently devoting the mind to virtuous dharmas and guarding it from impure ones. It is the way which leads to the nectar of immortality, the deathless state of nirvana. Its opposite, heedlessness, is the way which leads to experiencing the misery of birth and death in samsara. The Muni declared this in the following way. Mindfulness is the way of immortality. Conscientiousness is the way of immortality. Heedlessness, the way of death. The mindful, the conscientious, will not die. The heedless are perpetually dead or die again and again. They don't ever achieve the deathless state. Always exert yourself, therefore, in conscientiousness, the practice of habituating oneself to virtuous dharmas, in order to give rise to those virtuous dharmas as yet ungenerated and develop further those which are. This sounds like our dedication prayer, right? May the precious bodhicitta that has arisen not decline, but increase forevermore, right? Okay. The next verse responds to the thought one may have of, well, if you wanted to help me, why didn't you state this instruction at the very outset? As I have already in the past been remiss, what can I do now? It's kind of an interesting verse where somebody might say, well, you're giving us this wonderful advice about how to be conscientious and make sure we stay on this path of virtue. But that would have been really useful, earlier in this life before I killed all these people and did all these horrible things, whatever. Just joking with that. I haven't killed any people, at least not yet, in this life. I always say that because the prisoners I work with, I'm sure many of them who took somebody's life probably thought that way, right? They haven't killed anyone and they didn't think they would. I don't think I will either, but okay, so this next verse responds to the thought one may have of, can I said that if you wanted to help me, why didn't you state this at the beginning? Beautiful as the moon, freed of clouds, is the formerly heedless one, now become conscientious, akin to Nanda, Angulimala, Satru, and Udayana, King Udayana. So they're going to get the stories of each of these people, and they're told really nicely in Geshe Sopa's commentary, so I won't spend much time on them. But the commentary from Venerable Randawa says, one may have formerly committed non-virtuous acts wantonly, either through being overcome with mental afflictions or through the influence of evil companions, and hence already been remiss, right? We may have already done a lot of stuff that we regret. However, if such a person later should meet with a spiritual friend and, through diligently undertaking to adopt correct ways, become mindful, then they will become very beautiful, like a moon freed from obscuring clouds. So this is the promise that the Buddha has, is that you don't have to be perfect in your behavior right from the beginning, right? That's what the Dharma is for, is to give us the guidelines, the pathway, so that we know what to avoid and what to adopt. And then we can follow that advice. If we've gone astray prior to that advice, well, acknowledge that again, and you can purify that. We always put that in there because that's an important thing to acknowledge, that we don't have to face the karmic consequences of those actions fully. Purify all of that, but recognize how wonderful it is that you now have what you need to adopt, and you can go forward with that determination. And this is what happened with each of these individuals that's mentioned in that verse, is that they were kind of astray, and then they found something that would, the Dharma that would lead them on a path of virtue. And we know about Milarepa as well. Of course, this is an Indian text, so Milarepa was not involved in that at the time. He's a Tibetan saint. But we know that there are many beings who have done a 360 or 180, not 360, then they'd be back where they started, a 180, right? They were going one direction and they went the exact opposite. They turned their lives around, as we often say. Okay, so the following examples are given in answer to the query whether there have ever been instances of such persons. Well, there's Nanda. Nanda was, it said here, in one text it said it was the younger, right here, younger half brother. And I think in Geshe Sopas it says a cousin, but I'm not sure. I mean, remember that the Buddha's, Prince Siddhartha's mother died in giving birth, like, was it maybe it was 7 days later. It wasn't in birth, but it was 7 days later. And King, what's his name? King, can't remember the father of the Buddha. Anyway, he remarried. And so it is possible that it's a half brother, but I didn't have time to look this up, sorry. But Nanda is either a cousin or a half brother of the Buddha. He was a lustful Sakya youth. He was ordained by the Tathagata at a time when he could not bear even an instant's separation from his wife. Day and night he thought only of her, never of practicing virtue. Then the Bhagavan revealed the dreadful condition of the hells to him, and Nanda became terrified. The Buddha apparently thought, what can I show him that will kind of snap him out of this sexual lust that he has for his wife, and showed him the hell realms that are the consequence of following that unbridled lust. And this terrified Nanda. Directed to meditate upon the path, he attained the stage of an arhat. An arhat is someone who's attained liberation. So it's a pretty major accomplishment, and was declared the most restrained of the Buddha's disciples. So again, Nanda was kind of a lustful dude, and then he turned his life around and became an arhat. So totally possible. Many of you have heard the story of Angulimala, which means mala of 1,000 fingers. This was a rosary mala of 1,000 fingers. He was the son of a Brahmin. Being rather dull-witted, he was deceived by a teacher, an evil companion, who directed him upon a wicked path, telling him that by killing 1,000 human beings and making a garland or mala of their fingers, he would be carrying out a true practice of the Dharma. When Angulimala had killed all but one of the 1,000, he was up to 999 looking for his 1,000th. He met and was ordained by the Tathagata. Later, he attained the stage of an arhat. The story is again told more fully in Geshe Sopa's commentary, but they say that when he came upon the Buddha, he said, my 1,000th person I can kill and get their finger and put it on my mala, and then I will achieve liberation. And it said that he would chase the Buddha, and the Buddha would keep, through his magical powers, keep moving further ahead. So he kept moving and moving and moving, and the Angulimala never quite caught up to him. And then at one point he finally stopped, and Angulimala said, I need to kill you. You're my 1,000th. And he says, okay, then you can kill me. He says, but first let me tell you something. And he gave him a short teaching and what have you, and that turned Angulimala around. And so he did, the Buddha had this amazing power to help someone who was pretty far astray. I mean, 999 people, come on, that's a lot of people. That's not even, I mean, most serial killers are up in like the 10s, 20s, maybe 30s, this is huge. So again, whether the story is true or not, the point of it is that you can adopt heedfulness, conscientiousness, and actually change your life. And we have the story of the other two in this next paragraph. Through his association with the evil Devadatta, who was a cousin of the Buddha, as I understand, Ajatasattu committed numerous sins, including the murder of his own father, the pious king Bimbisara. You may have heard of Bimbisara. There's a story of Udayana and Bimbisara that has to do with you asked about it, I think even Sela some time ago because of the name Udayana or whatever, but this is where the painting of the Wheel of Life came from the gift that was given by one king to the other. But anyway, it says here, later, having acquired faith in the Buddha after killing his father, he was able to escape the consequences of his sins and was declared by the Buddha or by the Bhagavan to be the most faithful of the Upasakas. Udayana murdered his own mother. This is the other king. Udayana murdered his own mother in this case because she had prevented him from sleeping with another man's wife. He had this attraction to another man's wife and he wanted to sleep with her. And sorry, didn't mean to do that. I wanted to just try to go down a little bit. Somehow I clicked on the down thing here. And somehow his wife by blocking or his mother by blocking this upset Udayana and he ended up taking her life. So though ordained as a bhikshu, he was banished by the Sangha when it was learned he had committed one of what are called the 5 immediate sins, which are killing your mother, killing your father, killing an arhat, causing a schism in the Sangha, and causing a Buddha to bleed through a malicious act, drawing blood from a Buddha maliciously. Settling in a remote area, Udayana constructed a temple where a large number of devout monks eventually took up residence, with Udayana serving as the elder. After his death, Udayana was born in hell as a consequence of the immediate sin. That's why it's immediate. It says that when you commit any of those 5, you immediately go to hell realm. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. You go right to the hell realm. But in this case, because of the virtue he had made in his life after becoming a monk and so on, it says here, because of his exemplary support of the Sangha, he remained there only a very short time and quickly escaped in the manner of a rebounding ball, like a ball that bounces down and then immediately bounces back up. After leaving hell, he was born as a deity and attained the fruit of stream enter at the side of the Bhagwan. Stream enter is the signification of having achieved your initial direct realization of emptiness. It's usually a term used to refer to those on the fundamental vehicle, the Hinayana. So it's not used as often with bodhisattvas, but that is a comparable state, when you have attained that direct insight into emptiness. So again, achieving pretty amazing accomplishments in spite of the fact that he killed his own mother. So again, avoid those negativities. Don't kill your father, your mother, anybody, not 999 people, certainly, like Angulimala, but, recognize that there's hope for all of us. We just have to adopt this more conscientious behavior. And even if we've done things that we regret, I mean, the one thing that I do mention, I mentioned the prisoners I'd worked with previously. Um, and that was really touching when one of them, who had killed a man down in southern New Mexico, I think near Artesia, he took the vow, the pratimoksha vows from Venerable Rabina, and I was there for that. And it was just so inspiring to hear him take the vow not to kill after having taken a man's life. But if you have a negative action like that that's pretty heavy, it's really good to do repeated purification, not just like, oh, I purified that when I did my purification 2 weeks ago and I don't have to worry about it. Heavier actions take longer to purify. But there are many examples. Again, we didn't mention Milarepa, but he obviously wasn't included in this commentary. But Milarepa was, somebody who, with his mother, caused the death of something like 38, 40 people, something, was responsible using black magic for taking a lot of lives. But he was able to turn his life around primarily through guru devotion, through his attention to all the instruction that his guru Marpa gave him. So again, there are ways of purifying any of these negativities through purification practices, the four opponent powers, but also through very powerful objects like the guru, where we can purify unbelievable karma. So again, that's to give us an idea of kind of working with developing this mindfulness or conscientiousness, and the fact that we all can do this. We don't have to feel bad that we've done things in this life that we regret. We can be just like these great practitioners of the past and achieve great things. So don't get discouraged. Now we get to practicing patience. Patience was introduced as part of the six perfections, certainly. But then it says here, when many undesirable things befall them, householders are often angered, right? We run into them all the time, and we ourselves are some of them some of the time. To deter them from such a reaction, the following verse presents the merits of patience. There is no austerity like patience. This is kind of identical to Shantideva's text, right, where he says that. Of course, Shantideva's is well after Nagarjuna. It says, so do not give way to anger. By overcoming anger, the Buddha acknowledged, one attains the stage of non-returning. Non-returners are kind of at the opposite end of the four. There's the stream enterers, the once returners, and the non-returners. And then the fourth one is the arhat. But essentially, when you get to be a non-returner, that means that you have gotten rid of a fair amount of the afflictions, that you won't return to the desire realm, and you will actually achieve enlightenment, liberation much more quickly. Again, the Hinayanas are not practicing the path to full enlightenment, but they are achieving liberation, arhatship. And so getting rid of anger is really important in the moment, in a temporal way, but then obviously more ultimately to remove anger from our mind streams. So it says at the bottom of the page, in this case, patience means not to become angered if injured, and should anger arise, not to continue to harbor the feeling. Because there is no austerity at all to equal that of patience. It represents the highest form of austerity. And then he talks about these various forms of austerity: casting oneself into fire or water, eating roots and fruit, wearing leaves and bark as clothing and such, are nothing more than acts of bodily torture, right? They're not the real mental austerity that we need. Since they do not lead even to the higher states of existence, what mention need there be of nirvana, right? Those practices of austerity don't necessarily lead anywhere. They're just bodily torture. This is what the Buddha himself, as Prince Siddhartha, found when he was on his quest for some deliverance from suffering, and he tried practicing austerities and became very emaciated, practically dying, and then had to resuscitate his health, reinvigorate himself so that he could actually find the true path that leads to nirvana and enlightenment. So hence, those are not true austerities. The true austerity is working with our mind to develop patience. Then it says, because patience is of such great benefit, one should not allow oneself the slightest opportunity of becoming angered, for anger is the direct opponent of this highest austerity, right? These are two contradictory states of mind. That's why patience is the antidote to anger. If you have patience in your mind, then anger cannot arise. If you have anger in your mind, then patience is not there at the moment. You still can try to move in the direction of patience, but nonetheless, these two cannot coexist in the mind at the same time. And it says, the Buddha acknowledged that by eliminating anger through the practice of patience, one attains the state of not returning to the desire realm. A sutra states, abandon anger, O monks. I am your witness to the stage of non-returning. Then it goes on to say, anger and the desire for sense objects are both causes for having to take birth in the desire realm. Yet, since one cannot abandon anger without also overcoming the desire for sense objects, it is declared that one can transcend the desire realm by abandoning anger. Let me talk about this for a moment, because again, Venerable Rabina often presents these in this way, right? She says, attachment is this mind that, especially with regard to sense objects, wants all of those to continue in our lives. And anger is what happens when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And again, it's not just sense objects, because obviously it's more than that, but it's primarily driven by the attachment we have in the desire realm to all these things that are tantalizing all of our senses, right? Giving us pleasure. And we get intoxicated by that pleasure, and we want that to continue. And if it gets blocked, then the mind of anger arises. So you have to, in some way, confront your desire to really get rid of your anger. Because the desire will continue to prompt a feeling of anger when you don't get what you want, unless you work on both of these together to some degree. Nonetheless, we do teach many techniques for undermining anger. I just spent 2 Saturdays in February up at TNL doing a little workshop on overcoming anger, based primarily on the wonderful book by Venerable Thupten Chodron, called Working with Anger. It's really quite useful, where we reframe things and try to see how our anger doesn't really have solid ground because of the projection that we make on the other person or the situation that is not in line with reality at a conventional level nor at an ultimate level. So again, the undermining of anger will undermine desire often too. These two are kind of working in tandem. You know? When desire gets what it wants, then we keep feeding that. But as soon as we don't, then we feed our anger and our frustration and our resentment because we aren't getting what brings us pleasure and happiness. So this is the relationship here. So when you have dealt with your anger appropriately and certainly by removing the seeds of anger and so on, then you also will be free of the desire realm and the desire that plagues us in this conditioned existence in this realm of samsara. With that instruction, he says that one should not yield to anger at the outset. The following verse states that in the event it does arise, one should quell anger immediately and not harbor resentment. So this verse is actually kind of very similar to something in the Dhammapada, and I'll show you that in a moment, but I'm going to have to open it up. I forgot to do that. This person insulted me, this one struck or overwhelmed me, that one stole my wealth. Such resentment generates conflict. He who abandons resentment sleeps easily. So we see that again, if we don't have a mind of patience and anger begins to arise, we have to immediately quell it. We can't let it fester into resentment. Resentment breeds more hatred, breeds more conflict with others. Let me put the chart or the file up here. I'm going to find it. It's at the bottom probably here. And I'll go to where I was before when I set this up yesterday. Hopefully it will come up. Is it coming up? Well, then I think it's at the end. We're pretty close to there. Here we go. Okay, so let me get this up on the screen for those folks who are here in the Zoom room as well. Okay, right here. So these are the verses from the Dhammapada. It's really quite interesting how similar, of course, Nagarjuna, was following the teachings of the Buddha. The Dhammapada are the sort of sayings of the Buddha, some of the main teachings of the Buddha. This is verses 15 and 16. He abused me, attacked me, defeated me, robbed me. For those carrying on like this, hatred does not end. You're never going to end your hatred through festering these sorts of thoughts of, he attacked me, he did this, they did that. The next one, he abused me, attacked me, defeated me, robbed me. For those not carrying on like this, hatred ends. We don't hold on to that hot coal that we're waiting to throw at somebody else when we let go of our resentment, when we actually manage to relieve that and have patience. Then the wonderful verse that I like quoting, and this actually should say, I think, verse 17. I forgot to change it at the top there. Hatred never ends through hatred, but by non-hate alone does it end. This is an ancient truth. Often like Jack Kornfield's translation of that, he says, it's similar. He says, hatred does not end by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal truth. And again, something we need to remind ourselves of. It would be nice if the world could figure that out and stop warring with each other and doing all these crazy other things, conflict with each other politically, socially, what have you. But, hatred doesn't end through more hatred. You're never going to have hatred being gotten rid of by you hating the person who hates you. It just doesn't happen that way. So holding on to these thoughts, having this resentment is so unhealthy. And I mean, we see it in families. That's why I really do like that this is being singled out in terms of householder practices, right? Because it often does happen with families where somebody has done something years and years and years ago, sometimes when you were quite young in your family, and you've had this animosity that just keeps perpetuating itself, and you never have any reconciliation, never any ability to get back to that, because each person is holding on to it, keeping it alive. And if one of them would just let go to the other person and extend forgiveness, whatever they need to do, to heal from that. I mean, how amazing that would be. But householders have a tendency to do that. Hopefully monastics aren't doing that, right? Hopefully monastics aren't thinking, oh, that person, they left my cup dirty on the counter rather than doing my cup with all the other dishes. And now I'm going to hate them for the rest of my time I'm here with them in this monastery or whatever. I mean, hopefully they don't have those states of mind. But we see in our lay life that this happens quite frequently, way too frequently. So let's take a look at what is in the text, the commentary. I don't know why that little number 1 came up there. That's very strange. Okay. So let me push the screen up a little bit. For the same reason that one should allow oneself no occasion to be angered, one should also avoid resentment. Resentment is also one of the secondary afflictions in the camp of anger. Resentment is the deep adhering to a notion that one has been harmed, such as when one reflects to oneself, this person insulted me with offensive words. This person struck me with a stick or the like. This person overwhelmed me by force, or this person stole my wealth. This is what is really sad when it happens around the death of the parents, right? And you think one of the siblings thinks that the other ones took more of the money or got more of the possessions, and they have that resentment because they didn't get their fair share, right?
That's not up on.
Oh, it's not up on the screen. Well, that may be because of this problem that we had. Let me put, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out of this. And then I think it'll be fine. Okay. I don't even need this up anymore because it's fine. Let's go to the screen share. Sorry, folks in the Gompa here. I know it was online. There, is it there now? Okay, good. So again, I was just talking about wealth and especially around estates and all of that and how painful it can be to watch families fighting over stuff. Such resentment not only gives rise to strife consisting of verbal misconduct, but also makes one feel miserable. By abandoning the resentment, one is able to sleep comfortably, or one's mind becomes free of misery. Thus, one should exert oneself with great diligence in abandoning resentment. The Bodhicharyavatara, this is again Shantideva's text, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, states, in short, no one of an angry nature can enjoy well-being. This is one of the disadvantages that Venerable Children points out in her books. People don't feel well with walking around with anger in their minds all the time, in their hearts, right? It doesn't cause you to have a peaceful state of mind. But of course, His Holiness often points out the physical effects too, right? It can be really hard on our bodies. Our blood pressure goes up. We don't sleep well at night. All these things that happen physically because we are plagued by resentment. And then it also says, he who with perseverance overcomes anger will be happy in this life and in others. So again, those are from chapter 6 of Master Shantideva's wonderful text. That's the chapter on patience. And it is well worth studying the chapter on patience using His Holiness's commentary, which is out there called Healing Anger. Certainly many other books out there that work with patience from a Buddhist point of view. But again, I like Venerable Children's book very much. So I think we should stop there. We're just about 3 minutes away from our ending time. Any questions or comments? Yeah, Mary Jo, please.
Did you say that's the name of the book by the Holiness?
His Holiness, his book is called Healing Anger, though it may be republished now with another title. Shambhala, they took all the individual books that His Holiness had published with Shambhala and made them into the Dalai Lama series or something, whatever they're calling it. And they gave each of them new titles, I think. So I'll have to look that up for you. But it was originally called Healing Anger, and it's a commentary on the entirety of chapter 6. I think it was in Tucson. I think it was Tucson, Arizona, where that was taught some years ago, beginning of the 2000s, maybe somewhere in there, or late 90s even, I don't remember. But yeah, that's really well worth. And actually, there is a fairly recent commentary by Lama Zopa on patience as well, which is his commentary, not on the entirety of chapter 6, I don't think, but on quite a number of the verses that Rinpoche gave at one time. So there are, again, those two resources. But if you want to just study kind of a really down-to-earth Western version of working with anger, then Venerable Children's book is wonderful. Again, called Working with Anger.
I wanted to ask you, is desire the same as wanting something? Or is it a special kind of want?
Okay, so Mary Jo's question is desire the same as wanting something, or is it a particular form of wanting? I mean, when we use the word desire in the context of making it an equivalent for attachment, then we're talking about an afflicted state of desire. When we talk about like the desire to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, or that's where it's more of an aspiration for something that is virtuous, then it isn't the affliction. But desire from the very beginning, it seems like in many of the early translations into English of so many of the sutras and everything, desire got to be the word to describe the affliction, the delusion. When you have desire or attachment as a delusion, what is happening is that you are taking an object that brings you pleasure and you are overlaying on it qualities that aren't there. And you are building those up so that you can't see anything negative about the object. And moreover, you want to possess the object and not be parted from it. That is the way of operating, modus operandi for our attachment. So it's distorted. That's why it's called a delusion, is because it's not seeing things correctly. It's only seeing what is beautiful. I like Lama Yeshe when he's talking about it in Wisdom Energy. He talks about how that sort of misconception in relationships is particularly profound, especially when you meet somebody. We can imagine back when we were young and meeting somebody who we fell in love with or whatever, like when you see that person for the first time and all you see are the positive qualities. You know, you love the sound of their voice and the way that their hair looks and the way that they say hello or whatever, you know, find all these wonderful things about them. And of course, what happens in a lot of relationships, what happened certainly when I was quite young and found somebody that I thought was just the that beautiful person, right? Is that we start seeing the faults. Well, there's no room to see the faults with the mind of attachment. The mind of attachment sees only what is positive and overlays positive and beautiful on everything. And then this doesn't fit with the faults that we start seeing. Oh, their breath stinks sometimes. Oh, they're really not that attractive. Their kind of face isn't really quite that symmetrical or whatever. I mean, you start finding all these faults. Before you know it, you've got more faults than you do the good qualities. These all start falling away. And then you have the mind of aversion, right? You don't like that person anymore and you can't stand to be around them and you wonder why you got together with them in the first place. And you're trying to figure out how to get out of the relationship, right? So this is what happens over here. And we're doing the same process, just in two different modes. This with the attractive, this with the unattractive. We start painting this as totally unattractive. Well, every one of us is a combination of both of these, right? Attractive, unattractive. Some features we like, some features we don't, right? And good relationships are where you kind of acknowledge that and you say, yeah, I don't like everything about this person 100%. I like this person enough to be with them, and I acknowledge they have faults that I'm willing to work with and willing to be okay with. So desire or attachment is always overlaying things with a fiction. In the traditional text, it's called an inappropriate mental attention. We are attending to something mentally and inappropriately telling a story about it that isn't really in line with even the conventional reality. If we even look at the fact that these things bring pleasure, because that person, for example, who initially appears so delightful and wonderful, and we have such pleasure being with them, well, that's even not inherently within that person, right? Because not everybody falls in love with that person. There are unique person that for some reason we've picked up on what's attractive about them, and that comes out and we make that the whole picture, and that's our own particular view. That already is a form of inappropriate mental attention, to even think that the person is beautiful from their own side. There is things about them that we're seeing that we like, but not everybody sees those. So it starts with that kind of thinking things are there inherently, and even thinking that the person exists inherently, all these deeper errors that we're making that we'll get into later in the text. But the mind of desire or attachment, when it's an affliction, is always building that up, building that up, building that up. There's no room then for anything that is a fault or a flaw. As soon as that comes into the picture, the attachment, all the qualities just kind of dissolve, because it was all our own fiction. We put the person on a pedestal, and then we're surprised when they can't live up to being on that pedestal, right? Well, guess what? None of us can live up to being on a pedestal. It just doesn't work. Okay. I don't know if that was a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah, when we talk about the healthier desires, like a desire for liberation or whatever, sometimes we even use the word aspiration, which isn't necessarily virtuous either. It's a mental factor that is not identified as virtuous or non-virtuous. You can aspire to be the greatest criminal, the greatest jewel thief, but aspiration towards something that is positive is definitely virtuous. And so it wouldn't be desire or attachment. Okay. Oh, the speaker went out here. Was that, you were,
Off is really hot.
oh, okay. Okay.
The speakers.
Do we need to, John, it's back on, but do we still need to turn the heater off? Can you maybe, is that okay, John? I'm sorry to get you up, but if you can get that for Stella, because it's getting to be a bit too warm. Ah, she's got it. Okay.
No, I see what you meant.
Stella was cold here a few weeks ago, and now John's got a heater for her, and she's toast. Any other questions or comments before we wrap up tonight? Yeah, Mary Jo.
Is our ego involved in that whole aspect of, building somebody up? And so forth?
Yeah. So Mary Jo's question is our ego involved in that whole process I just described of building people up? Absolutely. Because again, where is it starting from? It's starting from this belief in this I that we need to satisfy.
And yes.
This real I. Yeah. mean, if we really got how the I existed, which again, as they say, is just an imputation, just a designation, we think of this as I, and that's all there is. There's no I more than that. And there's a basis for an I, right? You know, we have this basis for an I that is this mind and body, but that's not the real I, as we know, when from our investigations into that, we'll get into that again later in this text. But the idea is that we think there's this real I here that we have to satisfy. We have to take care of this I, get it what it wants, those beautiful people and wonderful experiences and sense pleasures and everything. Keep away all the stuff that gets in the way of that I having that happiness and well-being, push that all out of our lives. And we just keep building up this sense of I throughout all of that, believing in its reality. But it's not real in that way at all. Its reality, again, is very, very slight. I always like how Rinpoche would say, it's almost as if the I doesn't exist. We have to get to that level where we just see it's just an idea, in a sense, a conception on a basis. Not, can't just have a conception of something without a basis. That's how it always works. There's a basis for the I, the mind and body, and then this thought of I that we have in regard to this. And that's the very subtle way that the I exists. Anything more than that can cause problems and cause us to get involved in all of this, picking and choosing and doing all this stuff in our world to try to satiate an I that doesn't even exist. So absolutely, our ego, and when they used ego to refer to that false sense of an I, is involved intimately with all this. That's why, again, if we remove that, if you get rid of that ignorance that thinks that the I is real, thinks that everything is real in a concrete, self-established way, then the whole structure just falls apart. There's no room for desire or attachment. There's no room for anger. There's no room for any of the afflictions because there's nothing driving it. And we can have a lessening of that even without a sort of direct realization or any of these higher states. As long as we start picking away at it through meditation on emptiness, through thinking, throughout our day that this I that we keep setting up this target, it isn't real. It's fiction. We keep setting up the target that we think we have to protect and avoid harm to and everything. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you for your questions as usual. Okay, let's do our dedication prayers then. Mary will put them on the screen and Jana will lead us. Oh, the list. Yes, we're going to read the prayer list. I'm sorry. You can take it off the screen if you want, Mary, till we're done with reading these. And if anyone has any additional names, we'll ask for that at the end of each of the categories. All right.
That's January and February.
Oh, okay. I'm going to dedicate the merit created from this teaching for all those experiencing obstacles, such as Gina, Robin C., Yvonne, Joaquin, Margie, Jana, Cernby, Dia, Elsu, Asa, and children, and Jenny. Also for those experiencing illness, Jane, Rolf Dubler, Joanne, Rosemarie, Elena, Ken, Clara S., Yvonne, Don, John, Margie, Rosemary, P., Patty, Bill, Yvonne, Amata, and Jenny L., and those who have died in the last 49 days, Eve Dubler, John Else, Man Who Jumped, Bill Woodall, Bonnie B., Norm, Cody, and Sister Max.
Okay, and we have a request to add Adam to the list of those who have died. Thank you, Alexa, for mentioning that. And I'll also add Helen Goetz, G-O-T-Z, my aunt Helen, who passed away just a few days ago. Any others for illness, obstacles, or death? Anyone needs to be added? Yeah, Mary Jo.
I would just like to ask next time if you could talk a little bit about these lists. And, I sometimes it seems like we think, oh, that's bad luck. No, don't put my name on the list. If you could I know I've heard explanations at least twice, but
Okay.
thank you.
And Mary Jo was just asking if I could talk a little bit about being put on the list and kind of people being okay with that and the concept of it. Remind me if I don't remember, but I'll be happy to talk about that a little bit next time.
And is it, do we have the freedom to put anybody's name there, or should we ask them,
Okay.
you know?
Yeah, and do we have the freedom to put anyone's name there, or should we ask them before we put their name there? I'll try to address those as best as I can. I don't know that I've been given teachings on some of that, but I think I can talk to it a little bit. All right. Okay, Mary, if you wouldn't mind then putting the prayers, and Jana will lead us in those.
General dedication prayer. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain state of a Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen but might grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And long life prayers for His Holiness Dalai Lama, the wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel,
Source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech. May all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled.
And for Osohito Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, Venerable One, to you whose kindness succeeds them from all the conquerors,
For those wanderers in far off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us, and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request.
O Lama, please live long. And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones,
Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losam, Father and the Sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Okay. Thank you, Jana, for saying the prayers, and all of you for joining in. Let me just make sure there's everything we read that was in the chat box. So thank you for putting that in the chat box, Mary, around Mummy Max. All right, everyone. So have a good week. Again, try to work with these verses. I know that there's a lot we covered even like tonight, more than some of the other evenings where we had quite a few verses. But pick something that you would like to work on. You know, if you do find that patience is your struggling point right now with everything going on in our world, for example, try to work with that. And again, there are many techniques that are taught to help with that, but to see that we need to cultivate a more patient mind in the face of these things that perturb us and annoy us and what have you. Or if there are any other points that we talked about tonight. I know that this text is a little bit, the design is a little different than what we're used to normally, but it's got a lot of good advice in it. And we're not going to be able to obviously integrate all of this advice just through the months that we're meeting. We will need to do work beyond this time, but it's good to at least pick a few things that you want to work with. I might remind everyone I am going to still be here next Thursday for my class before I take off for California a week from Saturday. And then I'll be in California. I'll have one teaching I'll do online while I'm there. That'll be the next Thursday. And then we'll actually have the 14th, I think, is the day when there won't be a teaching, at least for me. I don't know if any other teacher will magically appear. But that will be sort of your spring break. And then when I come back on the 21st, we'll resume here, and I think I'll be here until the teachings conclude. Maybe in May, actually, I'll be away for a couple of Thursdays, but one Thursday, I think. All right, everyone be well. See you next Thursday.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Donna.
You're very welcome. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone.